What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Made You a Mixtape podcast. Very, very special episode. I am stoked for this one because I've mentioned it before. I'm a big Can Rock fan. I mean, I grew up, like the 90s Can Rock scene was like just meat and potatoes for me. That's where all the good stuff came from. And one of those bands that, basically was ear candy for me was Zuckerbaby. So it is a pleasure to have Reed Shimozawa on the show today. Reed, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. It feels good to be here.
So I have to ask, I do have to ask, it's been a tough year for all musicians. So right off the bat, how are you doing through all of this?
It has been tough, but it's also been a time of discovery, I think, in that I work a day job, and at the beginning of quarantine in March last year, I got laid off completely, which is a choice that I would have never made for myself at this juncture of my life. And it was kind of scary. But after being off for a short while, and sort of finding things to do with my time, I've been teaching, I've been doing, some YouTube videos, I've been doing remote sessions. And now I am back at work, but kind of part-time. And I'm finding a balance between, that sort of the work life, well, between two sides of a work life. And one side, of doing things that I love to do. And it's a pleasure to be paid to do them, So, I don't know. And I probably would have never made that choice to go, well, you know what, I'm going to cut back to half-time and take on these other things. It was out of necessity, and I honestly, I didn't know even that I could make half a living doing it, or hopefully more than that. I mean, I miss the gigs, I'm sure you do too.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You, not that long ago, all of a sudden this Twitter account pops up, Zuckerbaby is on Twitter. And you've seen like a bunch of people like all of a sudden like, oh my God, Zuckerbaby, I remember them. It was, how good has it been to be able to reconnect with some of those fans who still listen to that music today?
It's always great, throughout the course of time. I mean, it's been a long time now. We just realized not that long ago, it was 24 years since the release of our debut. And at times it seems like, oh, that was ages ago. And other times it seems like it wasn't that long. And obviously Zuckerbaby is an entity in my life that continues onwards, whether we're active or not, and will talk to me about it. And it's great to just, to have something out there that somebody gives a shit about, I guess. You know what I mean? And the reason for us getting active again was actually, it was a friend of ours who had been a fan of the band previously. And he said, I've noticed that you're not active on social media. We have had a Facebook account that, we only do things with if and when something comes up. And he said, do you want a hand, like, running some of this stuff and just, being an admin? He offered to be an admin on the account. And he said, sure. And he said, well, do you mind if I open a Twitter account and maybe Instagram? So, I mean, we're looking to get a little more active because we've actually hopefully got some new music coming out.
Oh,
Andy and I are another side effect of quarantine, I guess. You revisit some things from the past. Andy Eichhorn, the lead singer of Zuckerbaby, actually put out a solo album last year. So, he had been active, but then he kind of got shut down right in the middle of it. And he approached me not that long ago and he said, hey, it was great to do the solo album, but it also got me thinking about, our partnership. And so maybe we should do something. And it was just that, a super loose conversation. But, we found some tracks that we wanted to work on. Actually, a couple that we finished that were rejected by the record company for our second album, which is another story altogether, because that was a very difficult time in our lives as a band. And we were definitely at odds with some of the people that were controlling our career. And our second album probably would have been very different if we were left to our own advice, our own devices. So we have material from that area and other eras.
Now, 2015, you and Andy kind of got back together and you released the song "Do the Crime." Yeah. So was "Do the Crime" one of those songs from those sessions, or is that a post Platinum Again writing?
Yeah, that was. Over the years, Andy and I have always sort of drifted to our separate things, and then occasionally back together again. And we've done little shows with Zuckerbaby. Not this is gonna sound terrible. Not to appease anybody but ourselves, really, just because we do like doing it. We enjoy each other's company. We like our music, and we enjoy being creative together. So at various points in our over the course of time, we've rejoined and just done a little bit just for fun, just because we want to do it. And "Do the Crime" was the result of one of those. We had done a couple of live shows and written that song. We thought, well, if we're going to do a couple of shows, we should have something new. It just doesn't feel right just to be, we're not big enough to be a nostalgia act. So we thought we'd throw something together, and we loved that song, so we recorded it. And it was actually written before 2015 when it came out. It was written in the last round of, when we had done things together. And then in 2015, we did a couple of shows with Age of Electric locally here, and we put the song up to coincide with that.
Now let's talk about the Self-Titled album, because I remember, because I used to watch Much Music religiously, and it was such a an important part of getting Canadian music out there.
Sure.
So when Andromeda, when that video dropped, it was just I don't know what it was about that song, but it was just that very ethereal opening, like the vocal harmonies, the guitar tone when that came in. There was just something about that grabbed the attention. When you actually went and listened to the full album, it wasn't just like Andromeda and songs that sounded like an Andromeda. It was it was very much like it was total ear candy, because there were all these different styles. You had Shampoo, you had Belly Button Queen, you had all these songs that was just like whatever kind of music you were into. That first album really catered to pretty much the everything. How did that musical diversity on one album come about?
Well, first of all, it came about because each of us were pretty diverse individuals, and then the four of us were all separate as well. And when we came together, and particularly Andy and I as the key writers at that time and moving forward, we come from two pretty different backgrounds actually, but we had a lot of common ground. And our common ground was in pop music. And when I say pop, I mean the classic pop, Beatles. We discovered Jellyfish together. We both loved a lot we had common ground, but we both came from very separate eras as well. He grew up in Saskatchewan, and he's a bit younger than me, so he had just different things that had led him. Whereas I came up, I was a child in the 70s and loved AM radio, and I loved the fact that you could hear Blue Oyster Cult and then hear Charlie Pride right after it. You know what I mean? That's what I grew up on, sitting in the backseat of my mom's car. But then as I became a guitar player, discovered hard rock, of course I discovered Kiss, and and I kind of went through a more hard rock, I guess the metal of the 80s, hair rock, stage. But there was always this thread running through it. So what you hear on the Zuckerbaby record is really, some of them you might not recognize because they're a little more distant. You see some of the influences that are there blatantly right in front of your face, but you may not see some of the other ones that are just hidden, tucked in behind. They come from They may have come from me. They may have come from Andy. They may have come from, Wayne or Brian at the time. Who knows?
Now you mentioned that, those Kiss hard rock, hair metal influence days. Tell us about Smash LA.
So Smash LA, I mean, when I was a kid, I'm from Lethbridge, Alberta, which is a relatively small city. I guess it qualifies as a city, but it's relatively small. And, music was a part of our culture. I mean, we were in garage bands and we learned to play. And at the time, the most attainable goal, dream even for us, was to be paid to go and play on the bar circuit. At the time, this would have been, I guess, mid to late 80s. The rock clubs were everywhere. I don't know if you're old enough to remember this, but rock clubs were everywhere. And, we would go and see cover bands, mostly cover bands. They would sometimes play some of the originals, but we'd go see mostly cover bands. And we learned to idolize them because we had no one else to look up to, really. I mean, we had concerts in Lethbridge, but they didn't come around like it came to the big cities. And at the time, we were too young to travel to go see shows. So we would go to the bars and see, bands and actually, kind of idolize them. And that became kind of, your first step goal was, you had a dream of being a rock star, but man, wouldn't it just be great to go and play music on the road, get paid to play? I wouldn't really change that time of my life because when we eventually did start doing it, we were on the road playing. It was mostly, in bars and hotels, bars that were contained in hotels. So you would stay in the hotel. You'd play 6 nights. You'd play Monday to Saturday. And you'd play usually from 10 till 2, or maybe even 9:30 till 2. So that's an awful lot of playing. 6 nights a week. And we never took a week off. I mean, because once you were on the road, if you took time off, that meant you were a liability to yourself. You had to keep yourself alive. Whereas if you were playing, you had a place to stay and you had a meager amount of money coming in. But the great result of that is for, I think, 7 years of my life, this wasn't all Smash LA, but 7 years of my life, I had no fixed address. I just traveled with friends playing music, really immersed in music. I mean, we play music for 4 hours every night, but during the day we had nothing to do but play more music. We didn't have money to go out and do anything. So we would, wake up late, pick up your guitar and play guitar all day and then play guitar all night. I learned so many songs that I loved, songs that I hated, but over time you learn what makes songs great, that you love, or at least maybe if it's not songs that you love, but that other people love. You start to figure out the patterns that exist within them and mimic them yourself. So eventually, we started playing in a band called Smash LA, and that was at the height of the Guns N' Roses. We actually started the band right just before Guns N' Roses had broken. They were a band, but they had not broken yet. So we were there right at the cusp of that scene.
That Guns N' Roses 1 in a million era.
Yeah, I mean, we were in the know and we knew about that stuff, but most people weren't until, until Sweet Child of Mine broke. But that's what we were striving for. And so we had this band and, we actually, that was my first taste of success with original music, because even though we were a cover band, we also had original music and we used to play it as much as we could. And we actually had some success. We had a couple of indie videos that got played on Much Music on the Power Hour back in the day. And we got interviewed a few times. And, toward the end of the band, there was interest to record labels. Sadly, or perhaps thankfully, grunge came into the picture and kind of squashed all that. You know, I don't think that my future was playing that kind of music. I enjoyed it. I'm a guitar player. I love playing, you know, hard rock, and that's part of my DNA. But I don't know that I'm entirely that. You know what I mean? Mm. And so, in a way, I feel like maybe it was the right thing to happen.
So from Smash LA, you then go to Calliope. Did I pronounce that right?
It's Calliope.
Calliope, yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like the precursor to Zuckerbaby. So how did that form, and then how did you make the transition from Calliope to Zuckerbaby?
Man, so crazy times. You know, we had been playing in Smash LA, and Smash LA was even changing toward the end because the music, the scene was changing around us. You know, the bands that we had started out loving were no longer that successful. That era was dying, and grunge was in, you know. And so we kind of tried to change with the times, but we were just so known for being what we were. And so eventually it began to crumble. And as it did, also the scene, that whole cover band scene was crumbling. We used to be able to go and play, you know, 52 weeks a year. We couldn't do that anymore. Those clubs were dying. People didn't want to do that sort of thing anymore. And original music was becoming stronger and stronger. In Calgary here, we actually had a very strong original scene. We used to see, you know, as a cover band guy, I would see posters for all these original gigs. And as Smash LA was drawing to a close, I was like, you know what? I want to do that. I don't want to play other people's music anymore. I had a good run, but I think it's, you know, I'm over it. And so that was heavily on my mind, and I knew that I needed to make a change of music. And I had been locked into playing hard rock for that period. And as I said before, there are just so many things I was interested in, you know, and pop music was certainly one of them. I'm into blues, I'm into, you know, R&B, I'm into like so many different things. And at the time, I happened to see Andy playing at a club with another band. And he had a bob and he was wearing like a kaftan, like he was fully in grunge mode. But he sang Jesus Christ Pose that night with this cover band. And I was in the audience, you know, and I knew the other guys in the band. But I was just like, you know, it wasn't probably the best thing to go and try and steal their singer, but I was just so taken by this guy that because I felt like he had something that I hadn't seen. And so I just approached him and I said, hey, you know, would you be interested in doing something? At the time, he didn't even live in Calgary. He was still living in Saskatchewan, but he was traveling with this band in a dying scene. And he, for whatever reason, probably because at the time I was, you know, known for being in Smash LA, which locally we were an entity of some kind. And he was agreeable to it. So we sat down and we just started, you know, talking, and we eventually found another guy, Ted, to be in the band, and he was a bass player. He was really into sort of funky stuff at that time, Chili Peppers and that kind of stuff. So that made its way into the band, and I was into that too. So we ended up coming up with this idea: what if we could have a band that had all these funky grooves, but super pop choruses, because that was more Andy's thing and mine. And so Calliope was our attempt at that. When I listen to it now, I think, maybe a little misguided, you know, 10 for effort. I still like some of it. You know, I think we had some great ideas, and I think the creative spirit was riding high. And I think that was a great thing. But we were initially really not embraced by the Calgary original scene because we were guys who'd come, especially me. I was known for being from the cover scene, and they didn't really want us to be part of their, you know, group. So it took us a while to.
I do wonder that because, I mean, me personally, I grew up in Ottawa, and you kind of look at the bands that were coming out of Ottawa around that time. I mean, yes, Barstow Prophets were not, it's just a little outside of Ottawa, but they were still, Ottawa-ish based. Furnace Face, Garrity, like bands like that. So I'm very familiar with what the Ottawa scene was, but I'm curious, what the Calgary scene was at that time.
It was amazing. There was a very strong punk scene, which obviously we were not a punk band, but man, there were some great bands. Bands like Chicks Dig It, and I mean, there's a ton of them. Chicks Dig It was probably the most far-reaching, and they're a great band. I mean, it's undeniable when you saw them. But Field Day. Instrumental. There was a great instrumental sort of, surf-ish sort of band called Huevos Rancheros that were amazing and were very strong in the scene. Like an instrumental band could be, one of the big players in the scene. Was amazing. And then there was actually a very strong Brit rock sort of scene, bands that were influenced by British sounds, the Smiths and whatnot. Later on, they were in Oasis and stuff, but and it was those guys who we ended up kind of fitting with, even though we weren't entirely that. But the great thing about Calgary was that you could go to a show that would have a mixed bill of a punk band, maybe a roots band, Americana, I guess is what they call it these days, and and the Brit rock band, or and people would stay for the whole thing, and they would love it, and the clubs would be full, and it was fun, and a lot of the bands would hang out together regardless of the different genres that they represented.
You mentioned in both Smash LA's case and of course with Zuckerbaby, how important a role it was that kind of much music was there as well. I mean, like for anyone who is in Canada and watches much music now, and to hear us talk about how important it was to the Canadian music scene, people will be like, "Wait, they play music? I thought it was just much now." But back then, you mentioned shows like the Power Hour, shows like the Wedge, basically, feeding can rock to people across Canada. How important was much music to getting Zuckerbaby heard, not just in Calgary, not just in Alberta, but literally coast to coast, and how important, like, for everyone in can rock at the time?
Honestly, I think it was, it was everything really to us at the time. As Calliope, sort of morphed into Zuckerbaby, what happened is we changed a couple of members, and at that time we kind of let go of that sort of funky thing, and Andy and I just got more serious about our roots as just songwriters and what the common ground that we shared, and so we became Zuckerbaby. And as we did so, the reaction was overnight. We went from being one of the bands on the scene to being, right away, within our first two shows, locally, we were a band to watch, and we were at the top of the heap locally, amongst a lot of other great bands. And one of the biggest things that happened to us was when Much Music started paying attention to us as an indie band. This is before we were signed, but the scene in Calgary was very strong. There's a band called Red Autumn Fall, and they used to actually host their own festival in Calgary, multi-venue festival called Pangea. And it would be at all the regular venues, but, a multi-night sort of Calgary music festival with local acts, and Much Music showed up, you know, and Terry David Mulligan actually. This is my memory may be hazy on this, but I know that Terry David Mulligan came and saw us and fell in love with the band, and from that point on, he did everything he could to kind of push us, which almost seems weird now to think that there was, a national entity like Much Music that was so important. And you're right, people probably can't even fathom how important it was, but it was much more important than radio. And radio was much more important at that time than it is now, So, I mean, it was huge for us. And in the end, we ended up getting signed. Well, the start of our signing journey was at Music West in Vancouver. And, I remember vividly that Much Music was there for us. They came to our showcase and interviewed us. And, that night, A&R people were getting turned away at the door. The guy who signed us eventually did not see that show because he got turned away at the door, which was weird to us. I mean, we were a little bad from Calgary, and we didn't see that coming.
With music videos pretty much being, on demand as people were, do you find that people are still looking for Zuckerbaby videos to watch, to jog their memory? And
the old ones, you mean?
Yeah.
I don't really know the answer to that. I guess the answer, years ago, when I first discovered that our videos existed on YouTube, it was super interesting to me. I was like, who put these up there? Who did this shit? Do you know what I mean? But video was a big part of our career. I mean, you mentioned the video for Andromeda, and that was a big budget affair at the time. I mean, when we first got signed, the record company was definitely behind us. We were on Mercury, and for that first album, they gave us all the rope we needed, to. You mentioned diversity album. Kudos to Mercury for that, at least on our first record, because they were willing to listen to that collection of songs and go, yeah, this works. You know what I mean? I think it would have been easy for them to go pick a direction.
Mm-hmm. Now you mentioned too that there are some factors going into platinum again, and one of the big changes from album 1 to album 2 for Zuckerbaby was the changing of the rhythm section. Mm-hmm. How much of that actually changed, in your opinion, changed the sound of it, and how much of it was, as you mentioned, kind of the outside forces?
I wish I could blame all that on the outside forces, but a lot of that was internal, and you can't change history, and things happen the way they do. I'm not sure I'd make all of the same changes that we made looking back on them. It's very easy to go. At the time, it's easy to find reasons to justify things, and were they correct? I don't know, but it's in the past. It's not even for me to say. There was a certain magic to the first Zuckerbaby Mark 1, with Wayne and Brian. We wrote a lot of, we wrote that whole first album in a remarkably short period of time. And even though Andy and I were the primary writers, we would bring the material in, those guys, they played a role in fleshing it out, and they were, part of who we were. Unfortunately, over the course of the cycle of that first album, things kind of fell apart a little bit. Wheels fell off. And admittedly, I think that we thought, I don't know, that we could do better, or that there were legitimate reasons to let those guys go. And honestly, I don't know. I can't even speak to that now. But we made the choices we made. What I can say is that as the band evolved, um, I mean, the people that we play with now when we're active, or drummer Ian Grant, he's amazing. And I wouldn't change, despite the path that took us there. Things are the way they are now. And Ian's amazing. He did not play on Platinum Again, but he was in the video for Overexposure because his involvement came in after the recording of the band, but he is in the video. The bass player chair has been filled several times by several different people, and but for the past 5 years or so, as we've been occasionally active, it's been the same guy, and we don't feel the need to change that. I mean, as far as how it affected the creative aspect of the band, I honestly, I don't think it did, because Andy and I, we did bring in all the songs. What did affect the second album more was pressure from the record company, and I like Platinum Again. I'm not ashamed of it. When I listen to it, I actually think there's some great moments there, and I'm proud of a lot of the songs that are on it. But it's not the album we would have made if we'd been left to our own devices.
So now that you guys are, recording again, like you said yourself, some of them were songs that got rejected by the record company, and you're kind of at that point now where you can have that creative freedom. Is it refreshing now to kind of be building that back up? And as we get vaccines in the arms of people and live concerts can hopefully happen again soon, are we going to see Zuckerbaby back on the road?
You know what? I really don't know the answer to that. I suspect that we will play in some form or another. I don't know whether we would ever take it back on the road, or even, like, to be completely honest with you, yes, we've greatly enjoyed revisiting song ideas or coming up with new song ideas and doing them entirely based on what we feel like, what we think sounds good. I mean, that's, everybody always says, I don't care what other people think. I don't care what, and I think that's probably a lie in most cases. Everybody, even though you want to believe in your own music and you want to stand behind it, I think anybody who says it doesn't feel good when someone else says, oh, I love your song, I love this song, I sing along with that song, is probably a liar. Music is something that we used to reach out to people, and but having said that, we are doing this music the way we see fit. At times, like, I go, wow, is anybody, not because it's so out there or anything like that, but just because it's so free, you have to start to wonder at some point, oh wow, is anybody gonna get this? Is anybody on the same wavelength as we are? And I mean, hopefully the answer is yes, because we're doing it because we want to do it. We don't have any real notions that we're going to be some great successful band and quit our day jobs and at this stage of our lives. But what we do realize is that we still love music. We still love writing music. We still love playing it. We love recording it. And yes, we'd love to play some shows if the situation arises, but one step at a time, I guess.
Now, you mentioned that love of playing music, and for anyone who's actually done a search on YouTube for Reed, they might stumble across your YouTube channel, which has a ton of these phenomenally fun cover songs you've been putting out there. Very guitar based. I personally love the cover of Waterloo. I think I've lost track of how many guitars are actually in that video. Yeah. But obviously there's a guitar for you had the full guitar arsenal on display in that one. What inspired starting to put those out there? And do you ever see yourself putting out a Reed Shimozawa guitar solo covers album?
I've never thought about that, to be honest with you, but I can tell you what inspired it, and that is I love tearing apart arrangements. I mean, I love, as I said before, I love figuring out the songs that have been important to me and the songs that, um, you know, that help form who I am. I love trying to figure out why do they sound like that? What's going on behind the scenes beyond this curtain of, here's your presentation of the song. I love to tear them apart. I love to know what the bass is doing versus what the guitar is doing, all the different vocal layers, all the, keyboards or whatever it is. And I tend to really like complex arrangements. I like some simple ones too, but in the case of the guitar covers, I'm usually tackling songs that are pretty heavily arranged. And you mentioned that there's lots of guitars on display. What I started doing eventually, and I didn't at the beginning, was using a different guitar for each different track so that you could keep track of how many different parts there are. So in a video like Waterloo, for every different guitar that you see, it represents a different pass through the song playing a different part. And that was sort of my own way of, just keeping track of things, and also it makes it interesting, I guess. But
you mentioned, I was supposed to say, you mentioned like pulling these songs apart, like figuring out how they're arranged, all that. How much of that comes from those days of 6 nights at a hotel, and you have to have different aside from the originals, but pulling apart those cover songs and then making them work in certain arrangements?
Mm-hmm. All of it. I mean, that's where it all started, and if you want to be successful as a cover band, you learn really how to tear these songs apart, and because sometimes they're different instrumentation than the instrumentation of your band, or they're, you want to take a song that's from a different genre and make it work in your rock band or something like that. And as you do that, you start to learn, oh, listen to how these vocal parts go together. Listen to all this layering. No wonder, me and these two guys can't pull it off. But once you tear it apart, then you can go, oh, guys, I know how to do it now. The mystery's solved, and it starts playing, trying to figure out the harmonies in Any Way You Want It by Journey. To me, like, that's how it starts. But then eventually you're going, well, how many vocal parts are actually in I'm Not in Love by 10cc? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or, something outrageous like that. Or, I wonder if I could represent all the guitar parts from, or all the vocal parts from Waterloo, but played on guitar. All the instruments, in fact. and that's what those videos are meant to do, is take every musical part that exists and sort of put them all onto guitar. So every vocal part, every instrument, if there's a piano part that's playing these chords, well, now there's a guitar part playing it,
So of the songs that you've done so far, for the YouTube channel, which one was the one that was the most fun to dissect and put together, and which one, did you sit there and go, oh, I'm starting to regret picking this song?
Man, there have been a few that almost made me quit in the middle. I did. Well, one of the very first super ambitious ones I did was "The King Is Half Undressed" by Jellyfish. And that song, I don't know if you're familiar with the song, but it's every bit as, complex as the most amazing Queen songs, like vocally, all the different instruments, all the different arrangements. And that halfway through, I was like, this is, like, what have I got myself into? Another one was "Paranoid Android" by Radiohead. That was really hard to pull apart for different reasons, though. I mean, there's a lot of instrumentation, but there's a ton of weird noises. There's tempo changes, time signature changes. It was a huge undertaking, as well as, the whole middle section has all those layered primary vocals. that I had to figure out how to do. So that one was crazy too. There've been a few.
For someone who, didn't grow up, in that 90s can rock era, how would you describe, like, just, the thriving music scene that was this nation to them?
You know what? That's a hard thing to describe because it's something that you almost had to be there to experience. I haven't seen anything before or since. I mean, you have thoughts on that? Like, well, where did that come from and where did it go? Maybe more importantly, I mean, it was just such a strong time. There was diversity. I mean, I think a lot of the bands fit together, but there was diversity between the bands, certainly at the time. Um, and the appetite for it from the public was so strong. And I do think that Much Music played a huge role in that. Um, but yeah, I don't know. If I knew how to recreate it, I would.
You see over the past 5 or 6 years a lot of bands from that era, either putting out EPs or singles, or at least getting back together. You had the Age of Electric that put out an EP. You had Svengali that came back. Of course, Zuckerbaby putting out Do the Right, or Do the Crime. Is there almost not necessarily a nostalgia, but almost like a longing for how much fun that music era was?
Maybe. I think from the perspective of the bands, it's more likely. I mean, we just miss doing it, and miss the relationships you had with the people that were in the band with you. Some of them, Andy and I forged a friendship that, even though it got strained at times because we were both so passionate about the band, and that there's a lot of things that happened, but we shared things that you can't explain to other people. You experience all the same things, and so we I think we'll always feel a tight bond together, and coming back and creating music together feels good. Even okay, once you leave a situation like that, where Zuckerbaby had a certain amount of success, I mean, we weren't giant, but we had a certain amount of success. We did well at radio, we did well at Much Music, but eventually it came crashing down. When it ended, it's very easy to have a crisis. You don't know who you are. Who am I if I'm not a member of this band that I've poured everything in my life into? I definitely had that. When I stopped, when Zuckerbaby eventually ground to a halt, I didn't know who I was musically. I wasn't ready to dive back in and put that kind of work into starting a new act necessarily. I was pretty exhausted. But I also didn't feel at that time like I could go and, play for fun in a cover band or something like that, because in this weird way you feel like you're above it. But eventually, and this could be the most profound thing to say in this whole interview, you realize that the time you spent creating those songs, writing them in your rehearsal spot, sweating them out, playing them over and over again, and when you come across something and you finish your song and go, wow, I love it, I'm proud of it. You know what? It's never a lot better than that. It seems at times like it is when you're playing the big stages, when you're playing Edge Fest, or when you're opening for In Excess, or, any of the great things we got to do when you're making videos that cost, more money than I make in a year. It can seem like, well, this is what we're doing it for. But it's never better than when you're creating those songs, for me. And then hand in hand, when you go and play them for people, and you look out and see people loving your music, and that's really. And so once you realize that, it's easier to go back and go, well, who cares if we're not played on the radio, or if we don't have 2,000 people at our show, or, let's do it because we like doing it.
Now, for what it is worth, those albums, when they came out, and even still to today, they get played a lot over here. So thank you for helping me write that music.
And thank you. And you know what I mean? And occasionally I do hear that, and it's important to me because, we poured our heart and souls into that music, and I am proud of it. It's not exactly what I would probably do today, but I'm proud of that music, and it was a great time in our lives.
One of the things I find fascinating, and this coming from, being in a band as well, is, when you're doing the road trips, when Zuckerbaby was going coast to coast on tour, who decided what music was getting played in the car at the time?
I think we're somewhat diplomatic about it, although, well, you know what? I bet any money, a lot of the time on the long trips, probably everybody had headphones on. So that, that was the birth of the era of the iPod, right? So probably a lot of us had headphones on, but we would also listen to music together, and it was usually, now when I think about it, I think it was usually music that in some way tied into what we did. When we listened to music as a group, it didn't have to be our peers or our hard influences, but it was usually music that, hey, check this out. And then a lot of the times that would become, if it wasn't already, it would become some tiny part of our sound. It would find its way into what we did, Now,
when it comes to you personally, obviously, growing up, what music, what were you introduced to, maybe by your parents, and what drew you towards wanting to be a musician?
That's a good question. I come from a fairly musical household, although nobody, played. My mom is a good singer, and she would sometimes sing around the house, but they weren't, they didn't play actively or anything like that. But there was always music in our house. We had this big old console stereo, and for a while, my older uncle, not older, he wasn't older than my mom, but he was younger. He was closer to my age, but he lived with us, and he had a big record collection. And I can remember just sort of going through his albums and playing music and finding music that I liked. And, I was always encouraged to do so around the house. And the other thing, I already mentioned being in the car and listening to AM radio. AM radio was huge for me. And I that's where I learned, I think, the diversity that still exists within my listening today. If you look at my playlists, it looks like at least 4 or 5 different people are contributing to them. And I think that's fine. I just don't like when music is too rigid. I don't like how modern music, everybody's songs are all so closely tied together. I wanted to make albums like we did on our first record, or even more extreme than that. If you listen to any Queen record, a lot of Beatles records, Led Zeppelin records, you can hear anything. You just don't know what the next track is going to sound like, And I find that interesting. And I think that the sound of a band should just be the sound of the music made by those people. And it doesn't need to fit into this neat, tidy little genre-specific
band, not brand, basically.
Yeah, So, sorry, that got a little bit off topic, but that's as I grew up, my cousin, who was very close in age to me and started playing guitar at the same time as me, his family got a really nice stereo, like a Pioneer, hi-fi stereo. And I used to ride my bike over to their place and listen to music, and I can remember being hugely just blown away by listening to the quality of this music that I was listening to at a higher level than I'd ever listened to it before. And I was listening to it on vinyl. But I can remember listening to like Boston's first record. I can remember listening to the Eagles. It was all sort of hits, but yeah, so huge in my life to listen to it and be able to pick out all the little nuances of music that still haunt me to this day.
Do you remember the first time you went to like a record store, whether it was, I'm totally dating myself here, like a Sam the Record Man or an A&M Records or whatever, and like with your own money bought an album? Do you remember which album that was?
Yes, it was probably a Kiss album. Or actually, my very first exposure to my own music was a K-Tel record. Do you remember those?
Oh God.
Yeah. So it was a comp. They made compilations, and they would have the one. My very first one was called 22 Explosive Hits, and I think that was bought for me. I don't think that I went out and bought it with my own money. But so I got really into those albums, and I'm sure I must have bought a few of those. But the one that I vividly remember buying with my own money was a Kiss record. That was probably, if it wasn't the first, it had to be one of the first. And I went to a department store to buy the album, because at the time that's all I knew. This is very early on. I probably took the bus downtown in Lethbridge. It was after seeing Kiss on the Paul Lynde Halloween special, and they were promoting Destroyer. So I went with my money clenched in my sweaty little fist to go buy Destroyer. But when I got to the department store, they had a package called the Originals, which was Kiss's first 3 albums repackaged together as a 3-album, set, with a bunch of all the paraphernalia, book and a sticker and a this and that. And I was like, well, I could buy this one thing, or I could buy 3 for $2 more. I'm buying this.
Marketing is only Gene Simmons could do.
Right? Yeah. And he had me hook, line, and sinker. So that I vividly remember buying that. And I still have that vinyl today.
As I was doing a little bit of research before this interview, one of the things that I came across on the internet was something called the Calgary Cassette Appreciation Society. And, coming from, like I still have a bunch of old indie cassettes from like my days in like the Ottawa scene. How important is it that these cassettes are still, found, appreciated, and, do you ever see some of these old albums, these old cassettes maybe coming out and seeing the light of day again?
Wow, that's a good question. I think it's amazing. I don't even know who is the mastermind behind that, because it's a big undertaking. And there's a lot of stuff on there. I don't know how deeply you looked, and I certainly have not explored everything on there, but I've looked for some key things, and it's all there. Anything I've ever thought of, hey, I wonder if that's on there. It is. And I think it's a great archival sort of resource. I have to wonder, sadly, how used it is, how utilized it is, and whether people are going on there and listening. I hope they are. But, I mean, I guess if I'm to be totally honest, probably the quality of a lot of that music is not,
The recording quality, maybe not, but still the quality of the songs. Yeah.
Well, even then, you know what I mean? Like, was every band that was around back in the, that put out an indie cassette and throughout that era of Calgary great? No. There were a lot of great bands, but not all of them. Not everybody can be fantastic.
So it's come to the point of the interview where we get to learn a little bit more about you, but in a fun musical sense. So, if you had to introduce yourself to a total stranger, but instead of saying, "Hi, I'm Reed, I rock," you basically hand them a mixtape.
Which is what I normally would do, by the way.
That just says, "Hello, my name is Reed, I rock." That's the sticker on the shirt right there.
Yeah.
But instead you hand them a mixtape, and on that mixtape are songs that tell the story of you. What songs are on there, and why are those songs there?
Man, I will tell you that would, again, this is a pre-warning, and I have thought about this a little bit in advance. And it is so all over the map. It verges on embarrassing because it's so all over the map. Because I can literally enjoy music from any genre, and narrowing it down gets painful. But here's what I found, and you can tell me if this is if this is something that happens to other people, particularly probably in my age group. When I'm looking at these songs, I found that I wasn't picking anything very new because I don't know if it's going to stick with me for years and years like a lot of the Southern music has. You know what I mean? It was kind of an epiphany when I realized, I like lots of new music, but I'm not picking very much of it and the reason why is because I don't know if it's going to stand the test of time with me yet. And the other epiphany I had was that I always go around saying that I think the 90s actually is the weakest era of music, despite the fact that that's the era that I was active. But when I started thinking about this, I actually picked a fair amount of 90s music. So can I look at cheat notes?
Absolutely. Well, we'll call them liner notes at this point.
Okay. So in no particular order, because I'm not capable of ordering these things. And if I was actually putting this on a mixtape, it would probably take me months to do because trying to come up with an order for songs is something that I need to put thought into. But I have Welcome to the Jungle on here. Guns N' Roses, when they came out, they changed everything, and we've seen that happen several times throughout the course of history. In rock music or in popular music, when a band comes out and they just change everything. And Guns N' Roses undoubtedly changed everything for me. I was on one trajectory, and after spending some time listening to that album, I was on a different trajectory. I thought I should pick a Queen song because I'm a huge Queen fan, and I love most of their catalog, especially up to, let's say, around Play the Game, that era. The Game is the album, but I picked Killer Queen, which is a pretty early track. I love arrangements, and that song was Queen showing very early on that we can do what no band's done before.
Oh, and with their vocal harmonies, it was masterful.
And the guitar harmonies and Freddie's voice, and even the stylistically, that Killer Queen is not a typical rock song, at all. Here's a weird one. I'm No Good by Amy Winehouse.
Okay.
Amy Winehouse. I love Amy Winehouse. I was a huge fan of hers when she was alive. And I still to this day feel like almost more than any other artist who passed as part of the 27 Club or who died young, that there was so much untapped potential, things we had not yet seen. She was such an underdeveloped artist. And whether or not she could have made something of it or not because of her state that she was in, I don't know. But there was so much potential, and I still get sad when I think about her not being around to make music. And I wish I could hear a new Amy Winehouse album. Here, There, and Everywhere by the Beatles. You have to have, I think most people would have a Beatles song somewhere in there, but I picked it Here, There, and Everywhere off Revolver because it still baffles me to this day what an amazing composition it is. When I listen to it, I don't hear it being a complex composition. I just hear a song that I love and that I can sing along to. But then when you take it and try and play it or tear it apart as I do, you realize just how much genius is in there. Wiser Time, the Black Crows. A little known fact about both Andy and I is we love the Black Crows. That doesn't come out very much in Zuckerbaby, but we both love the Black Crows, particularly the Southern Harmony and Morica, which Wiser Time is off that. I have this crazy memory. We were just talking about listening to music in the van, headphones on, and whenever I hear Wiser Time, I am in my bunk in the van, watching the prairie go by and listening to the Wiser Time. It's to me, it is the sound of being on the road. So, this is a crazy list. I'm the One by Van Halen, off their first album. It's the most Van Halen song to me ever. It's Van Halen being impossible. Like, how do you even do that? What are those noises that you're making on guitar and somehow making it sound good as part of a song? I'm a huge Van Halen fan. I have been since 1978, and every 6 months or so I'll go on a crazy Van Halen tour where I just listen to Van Halen nonstop. Because I think that not only is he a guitar hero, but his music supported that. He wasn't just a wanker.
I do have to ask before we continue with the playlist.
Yeah.
When he passed, how much did it hit you?
Sometimes I still don't feel like it's fully sunk in. I had some inkling that he wasn't in the greatest of health. And I've always said that when Eddie Van Halen passes, that will be like the biggest one for me. Maybe that one, Paul McCartney, Tom Petty was massive. And I couldn't believe that happened. But I've got to say that I sometimes still don't feel like it's fully sunk in, that he's just gone. And it's not, it's still around. I don't know. It's hard for me to answer that because, I've had periods of mourning when other artists that I loved passed. And for some reason, I don't feel like I've fully mourned Ed Van Halen. And I don't know why. Maybe I'm unwilling to let it go. I don't know. But yeah, man, I'm a huge Van Halen fan. Yeah. I did a podcast where I was asking him my top guitar players of all time. It's number one for me. I'm sure he would be number one for a lot of people. But want me to continue?
Yes, please do. Mm-hmm.
Lazy by Deep Purple. I'll try not to talk for ages about each one of these, but Lazy by Deep Purple, for me is, as I said, I love blues, I love rock, I love guitar playing, I love that era of music when it just seemed like it was so free. Like you could, hey, let's write a 8-minute song with, 2 minutes of organ solo at the beginning, and then, but genius playing, and you could hear just the rawness of it coming through, and it's amazing to me. I love Ritchie Blackmore. I love that era of Deep Purple. I think that's when rock music was pure and it's creative and fun. From that same era, Hocus Pocus by Focus. Do you know that crazy song?
I do.
So that was on one of my K-Tel records. And it was a very edited version. They put crazy edits on those K-Tel records. Like it was basically just, don't bore us, get to the chorus. Just what do we need to have on here? That's what the edits they would do on those. But when I later heard Hocus Pocus, the full version with the crazy guitar solos and accordions and yodeling and everything, I just wow, this is the ultimate in creative expression. And is it nuts? Yeah, it's like so crazy, and yet feels so good. When that movie came on, it's in the soundtrack for Baby Driver. Have you seen that film?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, when that comes on in that movie, I feel like standing up and cheering. It's just. I'm sure part of it is because it takes me back to my childhood of listening to my KTEL records.
That's one of those songs where if it was written today, you'd expect it to be premiered at a Eurovision concert.
Yeah, or yeah, something. I mean, just people would not know what to make of that. I mean, it's all over the map. But kind of wonderful. I played it for my kids, and I thought they would go, "Oh, this is insane. What are you making us listen to?" But they kind of enjoyed it just because it's so out there.
And it's fun though. Like, it's just a fun track.
I mean, yeah, and when the yodeling come in, you're just like, what is even going on here? But it's one of those things that's so ridiculous that it's enjoyable. So yeah, that's on there. Depeche Mode. It's no good. This song was long after Depeche Mode's strongest era, but I have this crazy memory of being on tour with Zuckerbaby, and we were doing press actually in Ottawa, and the record company rep at the time was a guy he was a great guy, but I could tell he had no interest in the music we played, and it was his job to put us in his van and drive us to all these interviews that we do all the pressers, right? So we get in his van and he proceeds to put on Ultra by Depeche Mode, which I think that's around 97 that came out, and just crank it, with not saying, "Hey, do you guys mind if I play this?" or whatever. It was just like there was no question. But I heard this music, and I was familiar with Depeche Mode, but when I heard the song "It's No Good" off that album, I was profoundly affected by it, and that continued to be kind of to follow me through. That there's a certain element of electronic music that there are Zuckerbaby songs that have little bits of that style of electronic sort of a little taste to it, like Charlatans, Kasabian, that kind of era of electronic elements brought into Zuckerbaby music. There are things that exist. You may hear them one day, or if you can somehow reboot MySpace, you might do so.
I think that MySpace page there is a Zuckerbaby MySpace presence still out there with pictures on it. There is. I don't know if Tom's still the friend, but I know the MySpace page is still out there. Although it's very, very barren. I think the MySpace has gone through some changes, but it is still there.
Wow, I just assumed that it was the done way to go. I mean, at the risk of drawing this out too long, I don't need to read you this whole list because a cassette has 90 minutes on it. So you can stop me at any time. But, there's so many different pieces of music, as you can see from the ones that I've given you so far, that, I almost think that giving them people a mixtape wouldn't tell them that much about me, except for that I'm all over the map.
One of the things you did mention was about putting songs in order. So I do have to ask, when it came to putting together, the albums or even a set list for a show, how much did you agonize about what song got played when and where?
A lot. That's, it's a thing for me. When I was a kid and I'm making mixtapes, making cassettes, I would agonize about not only which songs I could put on there, but what order they would go in. And that definitely carried through. And the reason why, and I believe this, is because as a listener, because I'm from the era of albums, And now, just like everybody else, I listen to songs in whatever bloody order I want to listen to them in, and ignore a lot of the album tracks from a lot of artists. But in the heyday of album tracks, there was a definite feel to an album, and when you listened to an album, you knew what song was coming next. After a while, you could hear it. As one song ended, you could already sing what song was coming up next, and it was important. And I felt like it was a journey, and I wanted to. I was an eager participant in said journey. You know what I mean? You'd sit there with your liner notes and listen to this collection of music as opposed to listening to a song. And I really felt that a live show or an album order, for a CD, had the potential to do the same thing. Even though by the time we got to CDs, it was pretty easy for people to just skip tracks and, or shuffle play them or whatever they wanted to do. But in a concert, not so much. At a show, I still get to dictate part of this trip. And so I had definite ideas about it. And I think I always played a pretty big role in figuring out what the order of the songs was, and took pride in it.
With the prevalence of things like Spotify, do you think because people can just say, well, I just want this song on my playlist, I just want this, do you think that the art of the album as a journey is lost?
Yeah, I do. I actually do. I think that's too bad, but I think there's a lot of benefits to the way we, take in music now. I think there's a lot of good there, but I do think the album is kind of a lost art, and almost to the point where you have to wonder at some point, will it still exist? I mean, as an artist, is it just easier to just put out songs as you create them? I mean, you see that happening now. A lot of people just put out singles. Mm-hmm. Maybe they'll put an album out after they've got 3 singles already.
I know this is the band Stitched Up Heart. They were putting out a song pretty much every month. Still under an album heading per se, but they were putting out one song at a time. And you have to think, does that lend itself to an album? And do you remember? Totally side note here. Do you have albums that are, to you, front to back listens?
I do, but sadly, probably most of the time they don't get listened to that in that way anymore. I definitely do. A lot of those songs that I just listed out that would have been part of my mixtape, I can easily listen to those whole albums. And if I do, I know what song's coming up a lot of times. Even when I listen to some songs singly, as it ends, I'm expecting the next song on the album. Instead, the next song on the playlist comes up, and the next song in the shuffle, right? Mm-hmm. But albums I think they are a lost art, and I think they're just different. I don't think it's necessarily bad. I'm not one of these people that's like, "Oh, the old ways are better." Although sometimes they are.
So for anyone who's now, made it to this point of the interview and they say, well, I'm going to go listen to some Zuckerbaby, find them on Spotify, of which both albums are on there. What is your hope that anyone who is now inspired to go and find those albums and listen to them, what kind of takeaway do you hope that they get from that music?
Well, I hope that wow, that's a good question and an important one. Although I'd be lying if I said I thought about it much. I hope that maybe it would encourage them to go listen to some of the other things that inspired us, and that maybe if they're, creators themselves, that they would be inspired to just create things that, like, it's okay to not have it fit in a box. When the record company first picked Andromeda as a single, I was like, you what? Because that's just not a very typical single. Would you agree with me?
Oh, completely. And I think that's kind of why it stood out, was because, you think about the albums that were out at the time, Matthew Goodband was big at the time, Moist was big at the time, and they had these big songs that were coming out. And for Andromeda, it was almost like as soon as you heard it, it was almost like a sneak in. Just the difference of it drew you in right away.
It's interesting to me because that, I think, like, it blew my mind that they chose that song. I mean, I was happy about it. You know, I'm very proud of that as a composition. I wrote the music for that song and the melodies, and Andy wrote the lyrics. And I'm still proud of it when I listen to it. But it's complex. It's complex in its changes, it's complex in its arrangement. It has that a cappella beginning. It has a breakdown in the middle that almost sounds like a loungy jazz or something. You know what I mean? And then this crazy noise ending that was probably inspired by, you know, I don't know, Creep by Radiohead or something. You know the ending of it?
Oh, I could very much see the Creep analogy there. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I mean, that is a bizarre song. And when they chose it, I was blown away. But I was also happy because I'm like, it's easy to pick songs that are just like, here we are strumming the same, you know, 3-4 chords as everybody else and saying something, you know, that's easy. That just, oh yeah, that works. It fits in the box. And I don't think Andromeda did. So I'm very proud of that piece of music and whatever amount of success it had still today. You know?
Well, to our listeners, if you've never had the chance to listen to Zuckerbaby, go find those albums because it is a musical treat. Reed, thank you so much for the time and for coming onto the show. Where can we find you on social media? What's coming up next? And are we going to get the "Hi, I'm Reed, I Rock" t-shirt?
Well, you got me thinking now. I don't know. I'm going to have to talk to my people in marketing about that. But I can be found, as you mentioned, my YouTube channel. Just search Reed Shimozawa for that. You'll have to put the spelling on the screen. And I'm on Instagram and Facebook. And our band Zuckerbaby is on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find any one of those places.
Reed, thank you so much for this. And to all of our listeners, thank you for tuning into this episode of Made You a Mixtape. If you're listening to us on any of the audio streaming services, you can watch this entire interview over on YouTube. But if you are watching us on YouTube right now, hi, you can go download the episode and listen to us on the go. Until next time, I'm Jason. Thank you so much for listening to the Made You a Mixtape podcast. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me, Jason.